So we've seen a lot in FL Studio, but we wouldn't really be able to get things started fully if we didn't have an understanding of at least the basics of just synthesizers and a lot of the effects that are involved in music production. And we have obviously gone through a few of these while we've been working, but just to take a specific look at some of the native FL Studio plugins specifically to have an idea what they do can at least be a bit to get you started digging further. And this is just an empty project, so I'm going to go to the sampler channel and replace it with the first little plugin we'll look at, and this is just a really simple one, the 3x Osc. Again, we've seen this a few times, but it's literally 3 oscillators, 1, 2, 3, that we can change the shape. And you're just generating a sound out of that. We saw before that we could go into some more of the settings, but before we do, we'll change a few other things on here. We can randomize the phases of the oscillators, and we can fine detune their pitches. That might be a little bit much. I'll hold control and move that a little bit closer. Fine tuning. But just to get a really simple synthesizer, again, if you look at the hint panel to tell exactly what the controls you're looking at, you'll have the coarse pitch for oscillator 2, stereo panning, and volumes for some of the oscillators. It's very simple to go through all these different controls. And then if you go further into the settings, there are your envelopes that we saw from before. You could make it a bit more pluck-like with a bit of that release on the volume, or you could change a filter, have some resonance included on it, and even move that filter around with the Mod X envelope. But all these specifics making a sound is pretty standard among making synth sounds, and while that's not something we're going to focus on too hard right now, the idea is there. As far as presets, and this is something that you'll probably see a lot more of, if we liked what we had here, we can save this synth preset, go up to the menu here and select Save As, and this directory is fine, so we'll just type preset, nothing too fancy, and hit enter. And now that preset, if we click up here, we have our preset that we just named and also the default, and we can select through, cycle with these arrows, and we have all those settings saved and listed. And we can also access this preset over in the browser if we go into plugin presets, and this is a generator, so we'll open that, and 3x Osc. We have the default and the preset that we saved. We can just click and drag from there, and then we have our named and ready to go preset. You will note that our envelope settings are not saved. Normally that's not something we deal with, but since it's actually a channel setting that we had to use for the 3x Osc, they do not save. Generally speaking, a lot of the synthesizers or instruments will keep all of those settings when you save presets, since it would be inside of the actual synthesizer itself that it's saving the settings. But at any rate, I'll F12 and we'll get another generator here. And I'll point out again that everything is kind of under a category that we can look at to get an idea of what we're picking from. And we'll go to another synth classic and we'll pick GMS. And this you see is obviously a little bit more in-depth than the 3x Osc, but things are labeled and it's a fun synth to kind of go through and work on. Again, if you move a control, you can look in that hint panel in the upper left and have an idea what you're changing and the value. But just to kind of go through presets, we can click in this area here instead of in the top, since right now there's nothing saved, but if you did make a preset, you could save it as and have a preset in here. But anyway, going through the presets in GMS itself, as this and some other synthesizers save them inside of their own interface. Browse through like that and double click one you might like. And this is just one of the many synthesizers you can pick out and play with. Moving on to another one. This is a pretty advanced synth if you want to take it that far. This is the Citrus. And this one is pretty well packed with presets already, so if we click in here, there's a ton of presets to pick from. Again, they are categorized. And you can browse through them with that arrow, or again, you could find all these things in the plugin presets folder of the browser just the same, and you'll see they are organized all the same way as well. And this one especially takes a little bit more work to get through understanding all of the different things that this synthesizer does than the scope of this series really gets into. But if you are interested in a bunch of these FL Studio synths and want to get into some more, there is a series on Groove 3 about that, and tons of other ones of other synthesizers that kind of run in similar manners, so plenty to go into there. And there'll be more things like that on the way too. But back to here and now, just know that there are plenty of presets if you want to cycle through those in Citrus and in a lot of these synthesizers. Plus, if you work on it and save your own, they'll be there as well. Working through a few more, there's synthesizers like Harmless, and Harmor. Both of those work pretty similar. They're additive synthesizers, which you can filter things off or work your way through presets on those just the same. And once you have the hang of it, it's not too hard to make your own presets here, like a super saw. But this is the sort of thing you're going to have to work through and get a feel for a lot of these knobs and what they do, which is kind of another topic. But knowing that they're there and knowing that you can just kind of browse through presets to start out with is a good thing to have in the back of your mind. I'll hit F12. And now let's open up the Fruity keys, just a miscellaneous instrument here. Like we saw before. A nice little piano sound. There are a few different presets here as well. Different flavors to it. And if we did get something we liked tuned into the right spot, we could save our own preset as well. Like everything else, that's a pretty common way of working with it, with generators and effects actually, but we'll get to that. And aside from just the add menu, there are a few more instruments over in the browser. We'll collapse down and then open up the packs folder. Then instruments. There are a few instruments that we could drag in here. Like we could go into a keyboard, and if we want a nice piano, we could get this grand piano, just drag that over and it'll open up a new channel. And this is a direct wave sampler. And this gives you a more intricately and accurately sampled piano. And this is a direct wave preset with all of these samples loaded in for the different keys to give a more realistic tone, which compared to FL keys, there's obviously some differences. And depending on what you're looking for, being able to choose maybe the lower quality one with FL keys or this higher quality sample one or a completely different piano plugin is your choice to make. But anyway, that one's nice, and there's all these other different instruments to choose from. And you can open a blank direct wave sampler as well, and you could link samples to different keys on here and work through that if you're interested in doing some sampling. Moving on though, something you could be using a lot of as a beginner especially is a fairly new instrument for FL Studio, and that is Flex. And this is very much preset based, although there are some controls that we can adjust the presets. This plugin does sound pretty solid. And it can give you a very quick look at a ton of different sounds pre-made just through these preset packs. And especially if you don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of programming your own sounds from scratch, this at least has you covered for a number of different sounds available, which you can go through the different packs and pick ones that you like. You can go through different tags for presets that might be available. You can left-click to highlight several of these types or styles, or you can right-click to narrow down to just one. So if you're looking for a pad and you want that pad to be dark, you have narrowed down to just 2 presets. Or maybe you want it to be complex. But going through any of these different options here, there are all sorts of samples. You can go through the different libraries available or download other ones from FL Studio, even purchase some of them. So this is a very solid bank of sounds, whether they're synthesizer sounds based on a certain style for that pack, or packs like the General MIDI pack. Plenty of things in here. Even things like drum packs over here. A bunch of percussion. Or full packs of drum samples. And a lot to pick from there. Speaking of drum packs, we could also go into FPC, which is another sampler basically, but it's listed under the drums. And this is a pretty simple plugin. Just has a bunch of pads that are linked to MIDI notes, so C3 is the kick drum, and you can work your way up the keyboard to find the others. Work with them in the piano roll, and they're actually labeled there. And you can make your drum patterns in here instead of doing that with the step sequencer if that's how you want to go about it. But that's a good example of a bunch of different generators that we have available. So we'll take a second here and come back in the next video to start looking at effects. So I will see you then.